Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to look at the compasses. Now, over the last couple of seasons, we have looked at pretty much all of the working tools. We've dealt with the 24-inch gauge and the common gavel. We dealt with the square, level, and plumb, and recently we dealt with the trowel, which leaves the compasses. And we will be dealing with some other symbols that are used in other jurisdictions in future episodes. The compass is an interesting one to look at. It's one of these that again seems to often be overlooked, which is odd because it is everywhere. We see it on all of our symbols, it's on the altar, it's all over the place. But like many of the other working tools, it has great meaning, especially when attached to the square. And it represents so much more than this small, simple package would suggest. As we look at it, I want to peel back those levels. Look at what it means, all of its different possible interpretations before going in and looking at it in terms of the square and its meaning when combined. Because, of course, that's going to be very, very different. Now, in terms of definition, most people likely know the compasses best from geometry class. Maybe grade school. Maybe it's the thing that you scratched your name into the desk with. It was pretty common in my school. But this tool consists of two legs equal in length that are fixed together at their apex by some kind of adjustable hinge. In geometry, it's used for drawing perfect circles and arcs, a crucial element of architectural planning. In speculative masonry, compasses symbolize self-restraint and man's ability to rein in his yearnings so that he may live a balanced life. And usually this is where I talk about the history of the actual tool, and the compass is so old that there is very little history to be had. I mean, at the end of the day, it goes back to the use of a stick and a string, or a nail and a string to draw a simple line, eventually becoming the metalcraft that we see today. It's so ancient that we know that it's used in Mesopotamia, China, and elsewhere. So it's one of those very, very universal elements that we see in masonry, and yet we take this very simple thing and make it far more interesting with the lessons behind it. In terms of Masonic history, the compass, or compasses, in the square and compasses comes from the idea of keeping within the compass, which is from an old rhyme. By honest and industrious means, we live a life of ease. Then let the compass be your guide and go wherever you please. In the 1700s, this phrase and ideology was widely known. It was used throughout society. And there were many objects, such as teapots, plates, and engravings that adopted this symbolism as decoration without any connection to masonry. This is contextual. It's around them at the time masonry is developing, and so they're going to use it. Yes, I'm basically saying that it's not necessarily coming from the use by the stonemasons, but rather coming from popular culture at the time. And either one could be right. It kind of makes things difficult from a historical perspective. Keeping within the compass meant that you were on the right path and behaving in a proper form. The fraternities soon after adopted this theme, and it became the basis for standardization of Masonic values today. Now, we have the question of compass or compasses. When looking at the term square and compasses itself is often confusing, or there's confusion around whether or not compasses is correct, because many believe that it should be referred to as the singular compass. However, In Masonic ritual, the correct usage is in fact compasses, as cited on page 173 of Mackey's Revised Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. That's from the 1929 edition. By the way, there are other things that we do that with too. Scissors, for example. We use the plural term, even though you're talking about one pair of scissors. So, let's get into the interpretation. In the teachings of Masonry, the compasses are symbolically employed to draw a boundary line around our desires, to avoid overindulgence and maintain moderation. Basically, a tool of prudence, the foundation of morality and wisdom. Moderation being key here, that idea of balance or the middle way, which we have seen with so many of the working tools, so many of the lessons of Masonry. But it goes further. In terms of balance and virtue, how to use the compass is one of the finest of all arts, asking for the highest skill of a master mason. If he's properly instructed, he will rest one point in the innermost center of his being, and with the other draw a circle beyond which he shall not go until he is ready and able to go further. Against the littleness of his knowledge, he will set the depth of his desire to know, against the brevity of his earthly life, the reach of his spiritual hope. Within a wise limit, he will live and labor and grow. And when he reaches the outer rim of the circle, he'll draw another and attain to a full-orbed life, balance, beauty, and finally posed. No wise man dare forget the maxim, in nothing too much, for there are situations where words can be too much. You can go a step too far, and this means disaster. If he has a quick tongue or a hot temper, a dark mood, he will apply the compass, shutting his weakness within the circle of his strength and controlling it. Strangely enough, even a virtue, if unrestrained and left to itself, may actually become a vice. Praise, if pushed too far, becomes flattery. Love often ends in soft sentimentalism, flabby and foolish. Faith, if carried to the extreme by the will to believe, ends in overbelief and arguably superstition. It is the compasses that help us to keep our balance in obedience to that other great Greek maxim, think as a mortal, that is, remember the limits of human thought. Remember that we have natural limits, and there are things that we're just not going to be able to get to. And having limits is sometimes an incredibly powerful thing. After all, how many of us have waited to the last minute to write a paper or create an article for the Masonic Journal, and then turned out something that we were incredibly proud of that just seemingly came out of nowhere? Sometimes deadlines can serve those limits. Sometimes the necessary limits of society or the rules of an assignment do the same thing. They can bring out incredible creativity. In terms of spirituality, the simplest element in geometry is a single point. From this small dot, all other figures can be drawn, whether it be a line or a shape. Similarly, the point has Masonic import. It actually can be seen to represent the creative source of all things, also known as the grand architect of the universe. Why is this the case? Well, if we accept that we all came from a creative starting point, we can conclude that time and space also started here. This would mean that the beginning mustn't have any dimensions at all, as they all issue from this singular point. And a point in geometry has no dimension. It is effectively invisible. Just because you can see it and you could measure the mark that you created doesn't mean that you can measure the point that should be there. Therefore, the dimensionless point is a perfect image to represent the state in which the grand architect resides. With the point in place, we can now represent creation and start to bring in the first elements in the logo we are attempting to decipher, the compasses. With a pair of compasses, we all know that we can place one arm onto the point and the other can be used to draw a circle. This circle can be interpreted to represent our universe, the known universe, the cosmos. As Carl Sagan said, the cosmos is everything that ever was, that is, and that will ever be. In addition, we have now constructed another famous symbol in Masonry, the point within a circle, the creator, and the creation. The compasses then represent the great architect reaching out to all creation, as depicted in William Blake's The Ancient of Days, another painting reference, where we have God reaching down with a pair of compasses in his hand. We can also see why the compasses in the Masonic logo is pointed downward from heaven to earth. Now, an interesting point that came up in a conversation I had several episodes ago with Pat Choka is this idea of the dull point. Strong connection to deity creates a strong point. And what I'm referring to is the point on one arm of the compass. If we lose that connection, the point dulls. And the guidance does what a dull compass does. It skips, it slides, it moves, it no longer creates a perfect circle. That dull point means the circle of our bounds is now uneven and inconsistent. It means our bounds are dictated by a good connection to our moral framework, very similar to some of the ideas of the square. To lose focus on morality means that we lose our guidance. We lose a sense of who we are, what our limits are, and what we should be doing, how we should interact within the lodge. Now, when combined with the square, it becomes something somewhat different. Taken together, the square and compasses can serve as a reminder that acting truly together towards others, acting truly towards others and balancing one's own needs will lead to a life of integrity. Let's take, for example, morality. The square and compass is one of the most recognizable symbols of Masonry. It consists of two tools, a square and a set of compasses, arranged together in a particular way. Together, these two tools are said to represent the moral values that Freemasons strive for in their lives: morality, truth, justice, and integrity. The square represents morality as it helps us to measure our actions against an objective standard of right and wrong. The compass symbolizes truth by reminding us to stay within the boundaries of our moral compass. Justice is represented by both tools. The square helps us to determine if an act is just or unjust, while the compass reminds us that justice must be applied equally to all people. Lastly, integrity is represented by both tools. The square reminds us to act with honesty and sincerity in all matters, while the compasses reminds us to be true to our principles and values at all times. These four moral values are essential principles for any Freemason who wants to live a life of honor and integrity. The use of these two tools, the square and the compasses, serve as a reminder for them never to forget these principles as they go about their daily lives. Now, we also see a spiritual element here in the use of the square and compasses. In ancient symbolism, the square signifies the earth, while a circle drawn with the compasses represents the heavens. For the Freemason, the square represents what is earthly and material, while the compasses signify the heavenly and the spiritual. It is not without significance that the position of the points of the compasses within the interlaced square and compasses changes as a Freemason progresses. It represents his progression in life, from the here to the hereafter, from birth to the everlasting life, from the seeker of human knowledge to the seeker of divine understanding, where the spiritual has obtained full mastery and control over the earthly and the material. The square represents the moral law that dictates our relationship with others and guides our actions here on earth. The compasses signifies our endless pursuit of spiritual understanding and our relationship with God. Together, the square and compasses should constantly remind the Freemason of the balance required between the earthly and the spiritual, that our spiritual nature should rule and govern our earthly nature, knowing that in the end, he will dispense impartial justice and will either reward or punish us in the everlasting life according to our obedience to his divine command while here on earth. In terms of practical application, the compass not only sets our bounds, but reminds us of that other element that's there in every degree, that's there in every lesson or teaching, which is the spiritual. Once we move beyond the terrestrial understanding of any of these tools, we necessarily move into pondering, into contemplating the immortal, into trying to understand, probably with reverence and admiration, the glorious works of creation and the perfection of the divine creator. That's really what the compass is doing. It's reminding us that while the square works here on earth, squaring our actions by the square of virtue, the idea of moral framework, that's something that applies here. But that we have to constantly have a view towards what is beyond, to attempt in our own way to understand the spiritual and to keep the spiritual in our lives. In the symbolism of the square and compasses, the compasses represent your higher self, your spiritual aspect, which is capable of higher thought, of a life beyond the material or physically based nature. Compasses draw circles, and circles are found in visible nature. Therefore, the compasses represent the divine, the creator, a higher power. As such, they represent inner divinity, the divine spark, the higher self. And when I say inner divinity, this is that idea of rationality as the gift of deity to man, this idea that we all have the ability to be this sort of spiritual being in our own lives. Not that we would take the place of deity, but that we can do our best to emulate what we believe to be the proper spiritual path. Placing the compasses atop the square represents the entire purpose of Freemasonry, to improve oneself and progress above one's base nature. By doing so, a Freemason endeavors to become the best human being he can, transcending his ego, embracing his higher self, finding enlightenment in Masonry, however you want to put it, but seeking that part of him that is deity-like, that is spiritual, that is more than the simple elements of this world. We are always trying to transcend the physical. We are always trying to understand the universe, which includes things that are unseen, and that's really the symbolism of the compass, drawing our eye up to understand that even if we are masters of our physical realm, even if we understand the 7 liberal arts and sciences to such a degree as to be termed a polymath or to be seen as another Stephen Hawking's, whatever it is, that there's always something more. The compasses call on us to keep an eye towards the spiritual, keep an eye towards the transcendent, and not lose that connection to deity. Thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Linke, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.